This message is to encourage all piano students to not give up. It's so discouraging when you practice technique in order to acquire reliability in the performance. You repeat and repeat and repeat section by section, and you feel discouraged because the next day it's like as if nothing was done. So there's no cumulative effect that is perceived right away. So you have to be courageous and also extremely focused in terms of concentration in each of the exercises of practicing that you do, or in the sections of the pieces. To acquire a muscular memory in the brain, you repeat it through the fingers, and of course the hands get tired by the amount of repetitivity it takes to build a muscular memory which will allow you in performance to be thinking above the fray and thinking how to direct your line, your phrase, your storytelling like a conductor who doesn't play. While you play, being your own conductor. Oh, that's so easy to say. Practicing slow tempo in order to prepare the faster tempo is also a very big danger, because one has to remain focused on short-term practicing viable progress. If you don't see that, you get discouraged. But don't, because at some point of repetitivity, you will gather this muscular memory that will allow you not to be invincible on stage when perhaps nervousness, of course, a new piano or different piano's action makes you more vulnerable to the unexpected. But that's when the practicing becomes so meaningful. Not to practice so much that you perform like another practice session, just to go through the obstacles, as many students would think, but in order to be able to address the unexpected of the stage as if it was planned. And what gives you the most reliability are the fingerings. Fingerings that correspond to your hand, to your morphology, to your elbow, arm, shoulders, the whole extraction of sound in order to get all the intensity on the tip of the finger, either legato, either staccato, either non-legato, tenuto. Of course, you develop sensitivity on the tips of the fingers, and that's why when you memorize a piece, when you practice a shifting with a distance, like for instance, when you have to pick a bass note and then go back to the harmony, most Chopin accompaniments do that, you have to deal with the right hand for the melodic line. So therefore, you have to memorize the shifting distance and reach the bass that you want to reach before you have to play it, be it a nanosecond before, even if it demands a little rubato for the right hand to delay the beat. Because you have to divide your left hand, in this case, in two hands, one for the harmony, one for the bass note. So you can practice the shifting from the chord to the bass, from the bass to the chord. But what matters is to count loud voice. And while you count loud voice, you realize that you can shift faster than the space between the beats, where choreographically you do usually, naturally, some kind of a semicircle or ballistic missile landing style, No, you have to glide over the keys in order to gain that precious instant to touch the bass note before you play it, to have the finger on the key. Then you can not only play the right bass note, because that would be the minimum expected to play clean, but you can also shape the sound of that bass note. Is it a pizzicato? Is it a tenuto? Is it a suggested longer note? You can start shaping the details according to your musical understanding or inspiration of the piece section. And I find that to be very important because many pianists, when they practice repetitively, they get bored. Now it depends how many repeats of a section in a row you can do with a full concentration, being aware of what you're doing and memorizing visually and feelingly. To acquire this, it might take more repetitivity than you expect, at least until you get it. And if, of course, you're discouraged by the fact that it's not accumulative right away, and that all your efforts are ruined the next time you play it again, that's where I address you to be courageous and creative in your mind, because while a string player in a quartet improves in the presence of the colleagues to match the bowings, the tuning, so it's a beautiful betterment of oneself in society whenever the pianists are loners when they practice. They don't have somebody with whom to musically raise their standards. They have to raise them by themselves. Even if they're preparing a concerto, they practice as a sonata. Even if they prepare chamber music, they practice as a solo sonata. In other words, that is the key to the problem for most pianists, is that they have to practice alone. And when you practice alone, you don't assess so well if you did not a little or enough progress. Of course, ideally, we should have practice room coaches. I mean, any sportive person would be trained and coached at the same time. So the practicing would be trained, and the coaching will define what are the goals to attain. And I find that I strongly encourage the students, when they practice slow tempo, to use the exact same position of the wrist according to the knuckles of the support of the palm, in order to liberate the wrist from tension or the tendons. Because when you practice slow tempo, the music doesn't sound like it does when you really play it, or you love to hear it and you wish to play it like, if not better, at least yourself, which is the essential appropriation. Now it's my turn to play this piece, which I've dreamed so much to do. But practicing it is dreadful. Playing it is inspirational. Faking it without technique is no artistry. A lot of technique without any musical connection is quasi-impossible, because it's human nature. And what we do is better our human nature in one technical aspect. Independence of fingers, especially common tendon 5-4. Preparing flexibility of the thumb so it can deeply go under the hand, and not only from the front phalange but from this. All kinds of technical facts according to the topography of the terrain. If you play in F sharp major, a piece that is written, and you play it in A major, it's not the same amount of combination of higher keys, which are the black thin ones, and the white ones, which are wider but aligned. Therefore, it's always more danger to hit the neighboring tone by mistake on the white key than on the black key, because there is no neighboring tone to the black key, surrounded by white keys. And that, for the shiftings, is very important, to use the elbow and the shoulder and to anticipate, especially if the bass line is far away. As Chopin often writes, you have to put your elbow and your shoulder ready. Open your wings, as I like to say. Of course, it makes you look like you're rowing and not piano playing, but it's better than trying to grab sideways, because you keep your arms around your trunk, and then you want to practice and find and fetch a note, and you try to just fetch it and return it as if you just grab it. But your fifth finger being short, you'll be always short, even if the other fingers of the exact distance shifting, unless you do this. In which case you place yourself in front of the key of the high register, as if you're in front of it, while you're in the middle register, sitting in front of the center of the piano keyboard. So to anticipate the touch, to prepare the note, to count loud voice when you practice, in order to organize your phrasing according to the pulse, independently counted ideally, is not something that comes right away. It's easier to, and naturally more practical, to delegate the counting to the metronome and try to match it to be stable according to the sections where your fingers bring you to play unevenly, and therefore you change the tempo or the pace or the pulse. So practicing under tempo has to be done with the fingerings and the arm position of in tempo. Now we go to the quality of the direction of the phrase and the choice of the musical line's purpose, so in the narrative aspect of the story. You have sometimes a beam on the part that is written like a phrasing, or perhaps a bowing if it was a string instrument. But in reality, you have to take into account always the decay of the sound for the longer values. And you want to bridge the furthest you can. Don't always follow your instinct of the harmonic tension release, because then you'll have always small blocks of melodic phrasing. Sometimes the melody can be overlapping, and the horizon line length compared to the harmonization that could be more casually by group of perhaps several bars. And I think for that, especially often the case in andantes or adagios of Mozart or Beethoven, subdividing fast values like 16th and 30 seconds in order to play them adagio, and create a melodic line that spreads through a long musical sentence. So what do you do then? Try to practice it moderato, almost allegro. Take the 8 bars of the beginning of a slow movement and force yourself to play them fast several times in order to initiate the opening, upbeat, downbeat, regardless what, and then the arrival punctuation before the next phrase. And you play it as if it's an allegro. When it is, you realize quickly where each phrase leads you to, and you write it on the score, marking it, and say, this is going to be my aim to prepare for that arrival point. I'm not going to drop the line before. Even if the harmony does, I will independently, as Chopin was meant to be saying, my right hand ignores what my left hand does. But, okay. Once we go back to the original slower tempo, you have to keep in mind this magnetic attraction to the arrival point, even if it is very stretched. So that's why I mentioned here the importance of intelligently practicing slow tempo for fast tempi, with the fingerings, the gestures and the situations of the faster tempo, and not by using the advantages of the slow tempo where your wrist can be a gondola up and down. And when you play fast, it's going to be like speed bumps, unevenness. And the opposite, when you practice a slow tempo piece, practice it by short groups of bars in a faster tempo in order to bring the natural flow of things even when stretched in the slower tempo. Because there are two ways to think of a slow tempo. You divide, subdivide, and subdivide, or you organize in large steps the pace. Of course, for the phrasing, the legato, the singing, the direction, you don't need to subdivide, but in order to place all the details of the 32nd or 16th notes compared to the melody, you need to. It's so important to keep counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And sometimes you can stand in front of the score that you're studying and count the beats while you imagine what you will be playing during those 6, 8, 12 bars, let's say. And then you try playing them with your count, and then stop playing and count it just by watching it like a conductor does, imagining hearing it in his or her head. And then start by playing group of bars under this structural group of pulse rhythmic patterns. The metronome is very important in the beginning, but at some point you have to be your own metronome, your own conductor for your own finger orchestra. And of course, the practicing for a pianist is acquiring a certain velocity or evenness, control on less obvious controllable keyboards, because every piano you will play will have a different action feel. And if you're too much dependent of a perfectly equal, light, and perhaps comfortable action for a given type of piece that you have to play, well, good, it's luck, but it's not going to happen often. As a matter of fact, in my generation, the teachers made us practice everything without pedal with substitutions galore in order to be not dependent on the pedal only to glue the situation, because pedals didn't always work, because keys are uneven, and because you have to control the melodic, if it is not only the melodic, any line that connects more than legato, but sometimes even over legato, by finger pedaling. So the substitution is an obligational moment to prepare that. Today, with pedals of a good piano and a good acoustic with 555, the melody sounds connected by the pedal. But I think the reason for which the teachers who taught me wanted so much for me to find ways to sing it, no matter which instrument I would play, even if I don't have to or can't use too much pedal, because I have to control each sound of the uneven keyboard. And so when you study fingering and you try to find, according to the length or stretching of your hands' fingers, what best ergonomic fingering will allow for your morphology to grasp the expected organization of sounds. So if you can always have a finger connection, would it be even sliding finger, or would it be substitution, which of course is annoying because it adds more gestures to the section, which is already very complex. But if you practice it in your slow practicing time, then yes, it will get embedded in the muscular memory. In fact, It's a kind of silly thing to say, but I always think that we should have a pair of hands to practice repetitively, to input it in our muscular memory in the brain, and then one pair of hands to perform, because by the time you teach your brain the muscular memory, your hands get exhausted. And thankfully, you should be very aware when you practice not to over practice, because your body generates what takes care of the fluidity for your tendons. And when you play too much and you pull too much on the tendons, chords, octaves, scales, anything with forcefulness and tension in the arms and therefore in the tendons, then the body doesn't replenish naturally the fluidity that needs to be there for your tendons not to get stuck and dry. So when you demand a lot from your hands and you do those shiftings fast or something, octaves or an etude that works on one specific element of practicing, improving, you always improve a weakness in an etude. Weak finger becoming stronger, thick finger like the thumb becoming more flexible, arm supporting more weight of the shoulder in order to play a dynamic range that's louder without to crush the palm support. It's so many things that practicing is ultimately the most important art, literally, of practicing that, therefore, a student has to acquire. Because then you know how to make yourself progress. You read a new piece, you discover the notes, you memorize patterns, you observe, you compare between patterns, and you start memorizing sections. Then you add another section. So most people do that for the memorization of the notes themselves. And therefore, for memorization of the shiftings themselves through the muscular memory, you have to practice independently, slow, hands separately, and of course shift and distance yourself to pick up the distant notes as if you're in front of them by counting in a slower tempo so that your shifting arrives before the beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, and then you have this moment where you touch the key and from which you depress it, not landing and then playing either the right note, which is luck, or muscular memory, but not, as I said earlier, quality tone shape. In fact, many times we think, I won't have time to do all this. Anticipate the shifting, prepare an anticipated substitution, organize, in fact, a separate action of the performance than the music itself. We don't try to mimic in pianistic gestures the phrasing of the melody or the expression. It's not choreography on the piano of the musical expression. It's an independent piano technique structure where you play, if you put the silent sound and you just watch the video of a performer, you watch the mechanics that are involved in the precision mechanics of the shiftings, the touchings, almost as if the fingers have magnetic attraction to the right notes and they cannot go on the wrong one. But it seems to. And then, of course, the purpose of it is to acquire a reliable technique to allow you to be so free for your musicianship. Gosh, I love that sentence in music. I want to take more time. I want to take time to prepare the bridge to the second theme. I want it to be lyrical. You have time to think about that, even in the stress, nervousness for some, for most uncomfortability to be in front of people, displaying your vulnerabilities on stage. But it's the piece that you serve, that you play, that you share, not yourself. So be aware of the focused attention to the piece, not to how people hear you play it, or then becomes just again an obstacle course of fear of will I make it through by passing the most difficult sections. Because if you are in real time trying to organize this in the performance, you cannot. Your brain just cannot follow all. And I must say there is something that is very important, is the hearing quality when you practice repetitively, which lowers very, very low. You just do it almost without to think, let less without to listen, because it's repetitively boring. But if you can practice on your concentration while you practice repetitively, you will go so far. So far. You won't feel discouraged as if you are spoon feeding an ocean or a sandcastle on the beach before the next wave, because you know that it's solid in you. It's a cognitive accumulation of awarenesses that allow you to be so responsive in real time to the unexpected when you perform. But when you practice, your hearing of the music is very lowered, let's say almost non-existing. But when you perform, especially in front of people, it could be also in a recording situation if you prepare, but let's say you play in front of people, what happens is that all of a sudden your very listening quality is heightened. Because you're in a situation where everything is heightened, you're highly alerted by the fact that you're on stage, you're watched and you're listened to. And so you have to be capable of reacting, because when you play with such a heightened attention, unusual compared to the practicing repetitivity, all of a sudden the piece, the structure, the texture, the elements of it reveal themselves differently to you, to the point to which you almost don't recognize it. And you go like, oh my God, my fingers are playing, but my ears hear things I didn't hear before. So the harmonic progression, the grammar of the musical expression in the notation should be so embedded in you while you practice with the concentration, that when you hear it appear differently, perhaps acoustically because of the instrument or just because of your own, as I said, psychologically more alert state of the performance, you have to have that same quality of alert acoustic awareness when you practice. Do I hear all the things I'm trying to produce? Do sounds have different combinations according to this or that pedaling? And so in fact that helps not to get bored in repetitive practicing. So you can be intensely scrutinizing what you hear from what you produce from your fingers, of what you read in the score. And so the neurons and the synapses that connect them fire up. Does this take short, mid, or long term to produce its lasting effects in our piano technique awareness? Yes, it takes a long time. And that's why I meant to say, don't give up. You are very courageous, alone in your practice room, on ungodly hours, desperately trying to improve what you could become in order to play the piece which you like. No artistry is there without technique. No practicing is effective until you get constantly concentrated on what you do. No autopilot. Full awareness. All the senses.